Hi, my name is Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I like to discuss how leading Brexiteers are expressing outrage that one of the EU laws that we potentially agreed to carry on following would likely scupper their malignant Rwanda scheme. Did they not read the agreement that some of them negotiated and all of them supported? That is the question. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So, alongside everything else that's happening this week, Brexiteers, including David Frost, who negotiated the Brexit deal, and Nigel Farage, who voted for it in the EU Parliament, are now complaining about maybe one of its provisions. And this relates to the Rwanda scheme, a terrible bit of red meat politics, which is awful on so many levels, not the least of which is because the vast majority of people who claim they support it don't even actually know what it is. The number of times people will, like journalists, for example, will find supporters of it and then explain to them how it works and then see that support drain away is quite remarkable. You show people what the scheme actually is and it's all of a sudden like, no, we don't support that. But the legality of the scheme is now being discussed in the Supreme Court. Legal experts are unsure as to what the decision will be. It's not like, oh yeah, it's clearly going to go this way or the other. But one of the senior barristers arguing against the scheme, Richard Drabble KC, has this week suggested that an EU law, which we committed to in the EU withdrawal agreement, makes the scheme illegal in UK law. It's a law which prevents the removal of people to countries where they have no connection. Drabble argued that although we had withdrawn from EU immigration law, we'd not done so from asylum law. The implication is that the UK negotiators may have goofed in not realising that immigration and asylum law have different legislative frameworks within EU law. And if true, and again, it'll be up to the Supreme Court justices to decide whether that's true or not, that wouldn't surprise me. The people running the Brexit show some were driven by like the ideology, but in quite a lot of the cases, there were people like David Frost and Boris Johnson who didn't really believe in Brexit. They were just trying to pretend that they shared someone else's ideology, which meant they didn't quite understand it. You know, in fact, if this argument is accepted, it will be down to people like Frost not really considering the difference between immigration and asylum, because in their heads, it was all just anti-foreigner stuff. Now, like I say, we don't know whether this is going to be the case or not. The government are arguing that actually we did withdraw from the EU's asylum laws. It will be up to the judges. But if Drabble is correct, then it's another example of how those who sold us Brexit, and specifically the Brexit deal, really didn't even understand what it even was. It'll actually be hilarious if someone like Ian Duncan Smith comes out saying how outrageous this is, because he was the one who stood up in Parliament when lots of MPs were saying, this is a weighty tome, this is a hefty document, we need to examine every little bit of it. He was the one who stood up and said, no, we've got enough time, we've had enough time to examine it, get it voted through. Because he's already once said, oh, sorry, I didn't seem to understand this thing I told everyone to ram through really quickly. If he does it again, my goodness. But at the end of this case, depending on the decisions of the Supreme Court justices, we may well be asking, did Tory MPs, including Boris Johnson, even read the withdrawal agreement at all? Or did they just decide, no, I'm sure we can trust Boris Johnson to have sorted the details out? All this fuss that the right-wing press are making about private schools. It's not really a great look for our private schools if it turns out people who can't even bloody well read, is it? Nigel Farage wasted no time raging against the prospect of the Rwanda scheme being felled by this potential revelation. Being clear, if it turns out that we did not withdraw from EU asylum laws, this is a killer blow to Swallow Braverman's Christmas wish. Unless they can find some asylum seekers who do have connections to Rwanda. Speaking of which, same article which described Drabble's objections reported on an interesting argument on behalf of the government in favour of the scheme. Tackling the issue of Rwanda's human rights abuses, because that's going to be crucial. You know, we're planning on sending refugees to a human rights black spot. And, you know, the United States just recently, for example, has further sanctioned them for human rights abuses. So the Home Office lawyer, Sir James Eady, KC, suggested that we should ignore their abuses and focus entirely on the wording of the agreement that we have with them and trust them on their promises. Now, I'm not legally trained in any way, shape or form. I am certainly nowhere near the level of eminence of EDKC, but it is also worth noting that actual legal experts are being clear that they do not know how the Supreme Court is likely to decide on the case. But I would be very surprised if senior judges have ever accepted an argument that people with a history of abusing human rights should be trusted to keep their word with no real argument for doing so other than, well, they signed a piece of paper. Of course they're going to keep their word. Of course, even if the Supreme Court does rule that the scheme is lawful, doesn't necessarily mean things will happen. We're probably not going to get the decision until next year. Well, we'll certainly not get it until next year. It might February, March, maybe. Who knows? Then there might only be 2 or 3 months before the election. Labour have said the scheme's going to be buried if they win the election. It would still be the case that individuals could challenge decisions in the courts to be sent on an individual. Even if the scheme is considered lawful, it doesn't mean you can just send anyone. You know, if that were the case when Labour come to power, despite promising to scrap the scheme, they could use it one more time to send all the Home Office Tory ministers over. Also worth considering how the Rwanda scheme would be wound down by Labour. Let's say the Supreme Court rules that it's lawful and Braverman does send off some asylum seekers using the scheme before the election. Let's say the election's held in May. Because holding it next November will work against this, by the way. Because it'll just highlight the fact that because the Rwanda scheme will be functioning at this point. It'll be in full use. It'll highlight how it doesn't actually do anything. In fact, just on the election time in front, think about this. Imagine the Supreme Court give the go-ahead in, say, February, right? Refugees start being sent in March. Let us say we don't have the election until next November. And then you get better sailing weather over summer. Because the channel crossing numbers are down this year because although there was some very good weather in pockets, over the summer as a general, it was poor. So the number of channel crossings decreased. Now, if next year that reverses, they'll increase again. Now, imagine channel crossings increasing whilst the Rwanda scheme is in full flow. The Tories and Braverman in particular are going to look like right tits, aren't they? Just one more reason why they would be better off with a May election rather than one next November. Unless they lose the court case, in which case it doesn't matter from that point of view. But let's say the scheme is in operation anyway. I wonder what happens to those dispatched when Labour form a government. You know, the scheme will be scrapped, but what does that mean for those already sent? Do we bring them back? What if Rwanda turned down their applications and deported them somewhere else? Because remember, the scheme doesn't do anything like what's been reported in the press. It's not a case of Rwanda has to accept these refugees and house them. That's not what the Rwanda scheme is. The idea is Rwanda process the claims. And successful claimants then have to be housed in Rwanda. But unsuccessful ones, they just deport them. You know, the Rwandan government may decide it's better value for money for them to fail most claimants. And what happens to the refugees we have to accept from Rwanda as part of the scheme? Because that's another thing the government keep quiet about. We have to, we send refugees there, we have to accept some from them. Or will Braverman want to delay accepting those until after the election? If the Supreme Court do accept the government's arguments, I think I will have a lot of questions still, but we'll just have to wait. Right now, the default legal position is the scheme is unlawful. That was the latest decision in the High Court. There have been several arguments made against the scheme, only one of which has to be accepted by the court to sink this epic waste of our money and international reputation. But if the court rules against the scheme and Drabble's argument is accepted by the justices, that would be especially interesting because that would really open up the debate again as to just how much care the Tories and others, including Nigel Farage, really took when it came to negotiating and accepting the most important international treaty in generations. How will they really be able to say they understand Brexit when they don't even understand the Brexit deal that they promoted? But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.